The Metroid series is home to some of the most critically acclaimed and most beloved video games of all time. However, the games have a history of low sales numbers across most of the 14 entries in the series. Should Nintendo add an online multiplayer mode to save Metroid, or will it do more harm than good and drive its faithful fans away? Join Brandon, Andres, and me, Sean, in another episode of The Great Debate. Alright, so Metroid Prime 4 online multiplayer. Right now, what do you guys think? Do you think we should have it in the game, or do you think we shouldn't?
I don't know.
Yeah.
There you go, wrap up the discussion. We don't know. That's the end.
There we go.
No.
Yep.
I'm kind of leaning towards yes, just because a lot of the shooters that I like to play have online multiplayer, and those are always things like once I finish the story, those are great things to keep me in the game, keep me playing, keep me invested in that, the IP and stuff like that. Like Halo. Halo is one of my favorite shooters, maybe even my favorite shooters ever. Great online multiplayer in every single one of those games. And that's once I beat the campaign, which honestly is not that long. Metroid Prime doesn't have that much of an issue because it has a longer campaign, but still, eventually you're going to beat it, and then you're going to want to have something to link you to that game. And it links people to the online service as well, so Nintendo's getting money off of that ecosystem. The more online multiplayer games they have, and shooters typically have a very good community for that kind of stuff. So I'm leaning towards, they should probably get one.
Objection.
Objection. Gotcha.
Oh boy.
Well, no, I think you're right in the sense that a multiplayer makes sense from a business perspective. They can get multiplayer into Metroid. That's going to make them money. It's an easy avenue to add more DLC. It's a good business structure. Makes sense. That's why EA hates single-player games.
Right.
But you also noted correctly that the Metroid Prime campaign is longer than your typical Halo and things of that nature. But you also talked about shooters, and a lot of Metroid fans will be quick to tell you that the Metroid series is not a shooter, right? Metroid Prime is not a first-person shooter, it's a first-person adventure. And the reason why there's like that debate or discussion about it being a first-person adventure as opposed to be a first-person shooter is because the focus of Metroid Prime isn't about the shooting. While that is an element, it's more about the adventure, right? Delving deeper and deeper into an alien world, absorbing this atmosphere and exploring and just kind of figuring out what's going on and just going through the world. It's an adventure, a really awesome alien adventure. That's what it is. So if you incorporate multiplayer and you have a big, awesome like shooting sort of element to the game, that you're running the risk of taking away from what Metroid is supposed to be. I know a lot of people just want to have another crazy cool sci-fi shooter, but Metroid Prime is something a little different. I think it can be both, don't get me wrong, but it requires development and resources and time, and a lot of development teams, not just Nintendo, usually pick one or the other, and the other mode usually suffers because of it. So that's why I feel like we're having this debate, because people aren't always completely okay with having multiplayer in Metroid, and that's my stance. I don't know, because I'm not sure how well Nintendo could handle both, because I think the most important thing is to make sure they get the adventure right, and if they can somehow fit in a good multiplayer, by all means do it. It's hard to say, I think.
My dream Metroid Prime 4 game is just like a really, really good single player where it's what everyone wants it to be. You know, you're isolated and you're on this alien planet and you're just killing alien shit and like learning about the planet and scanning a bunch of dead corpses and stuff, you know. But I think that there really should be like an online multiplayer, not only because that's just what I want, but because Metroid as a series is kind of like, its fate is literally hanging in the balance because it just hasn't sold good ever. Like I said on Twitter the other day, like, which everyone should definitely follow us all on, is that the attach rate for Metroid Prime 3 was just so bad. It like sold the best technically, but the Wii sold so many systems, and like compared to how many people bought the game, it was like it was like nothing. So the last Metroid Prime game, like no one really bought, and
Right.
Return of Samus was kind of like, I feel like that was them trying to see like how much interest there still was in the series, and I think that sold pretty good. So I mean, if Metroid Prime 4 doesn't do that great, I don't even know if we'll get like another full-fledged Metroid Prime game. I think it would be cool, especially if they did like a Hunters 2.0 where you could be any of the hunters you want, and it'd be like kind of like a hero shooter like Overwatch, and they all have like different abilities and stuff. I think that'd be cool.
Well, I mean, just for the record, I love that idea. Like, because Metroid Prime Hunters was kind of like almost a hero shooter at the time.
It was.
So, and what's interesting about Metroid Prime 4 is that we effectively know that Sylix, one of the hunters from Metroid Prime Hunters, is going to play a vital role to the story in Metroid Prime 4. I mean, the Prime producers talked about Sylix multiple times in interviews, and when talking about the story for Metroid Prime 4, Sylix is literally a tease for Metroid Prime 4 at the end of Federation Force, and also at the end of Metroid Prime 3 as well. So, I think there's a strong likelihood that Sylix, well, it's like 99.99% sure that Sylix is going to be a big character in Metroid Prime 4, but what about the other hunters? Maybe. And if they're also in, that might mean that there's going to be multiplayer in the game. So regardless of what we think is going to happen, I think there's a good chance multiplayer is happening, like you said, Sean, because they need to make sure this game sells. And having multiplayer will do that.
First off, the Metroid Prime 3 came out on the Wii, which was a very, very casual system, and it was, if I'm not mistaken, it came out kind of later in the life cycle, which was just a time where a lot of games were selling because like Mario Kart Wii and like Wii Sports and stuff, like things that were like super casual. Like a lot of the hardcore fans they moved on, they left, they went over to the Xbox 360 and the PS3, and they were gone. So people who were actually left there to buy really hardcore single player games like that just weren't really on the system, and so sales were down compared to like the GameCube had a lot more of the hardcore audience, and then the 3DS had the situation where a lot of people were just angry it wasn't on the Switch, and a lot of people had moved on from that system because the Switch is out, and not a lot of people wanted to go back to that system. So I feel like both of those games came out at a time where people were kind of moving on from those systems.
I mean, I remember when Metroid Prime 3 came out. It came out, like within the first year of the Wii, we got Twilight Princess, Wii Sports, Excite Truck. Those were the launch games, and then eventually we got Metroid Prime 3, Super Mario Galaxy, and I think Brawl came out a few months later into 2008. It was actually like a really good window of games for the Wii. That was like its first cycle of like epic games. So Metroid Prime 3 was there early on. And I think Metroid Prime 3 actually sold worse than Metroid Prime 1 on the GameCube.
I just looked that up, and I was just going to correct myself. I said it was the best selling, but actually I'm reading it right here on Wiki. And it wasn't the best selling, but it sold more than double than the second one. So the second one didn't even make 1 million units, which is just really bad.
Yeah.
So the series, well, even though it's like as good as it is, it's just for whatever reason it just can't break through to like the mainstream. No matter how many this game's been around for like 30 years, like they still haven't been able to have like a huge hit with it.
Yeah, the Metroid series is always reviewed really well. Like critics always love Metroid. It's always been good. But it's not for everyone. I mean, I know a lot of people who play Metroid, and they're like, oh yeah, I tried it once. I never finished it though. Usually, whenever I speak to someone about Metroid, they never finished the game. And I just feel very sad.
Right.
It's so much smarter and well-designed than most games out there, and it deserves better. But unfortunately, what it is just is not... It doesn't appeal to a large enough of an audience. It's too hard, it's too sophisticated, it's too cool for the masses. Look at Breath of the Wild, look at Mario Odyssey. Both of those games are basically the Super Mario and Legend of Zelda that we kind of love, although Breath of the Wild is a bit of a departure, but they found a way to change around the formula for those games, and now both Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild are selling better than previous 3D Mario and Zelda games. I think Nintendo can do something similar with Metroid Prime, and that doesn't necessarily mean multiplayer. It could mean multiplayer. So I'm not entirely sure, but I do have hope that Metroid can sell on the Switch because Nintendo has sort of rethought how they're going to, propel their bigger games in this generation on top of what the Switch is. Brandon, I'm pretty sure you were alluding to that earlier. The Switch is a different system than the Wii. Games sell on the Wii. Hardcore games sell on the Wii. So, on the Switch. So even if they don't change anything about Metroid, I do believe it will perform better than previous Metroid games. But I do think they are going to change something about it in terms of both the single-player experience and maybe even a multiplayer experience.
I got some more sales numbers I just looked up, and I didn't know that Samus Returns did as bad as it did. Apparently, according to this post I'm reading, as of July 21st last year, so that was almost a year after the game came out, it didn't even sell 500,000. And that game came out when everyone was just complaining for years and years that we didn't get a Metroid game, and then we got one and everyone's super excited, and then it didn't even do 500,000, and Prime Trilogy only did 600,000 on the Wii, way after everyone had it. I don't know. I feel like if they released Metroid Prime 4 now and they actually marketed the game properly, maybe that's been the issue, is that they don't put any ads for these games or something. I don't really know what. They have to really revamp the. It's
so weird because for example, let's look at Dead Cells. Dead Cells is inspired from both Castlevania and Metroid, right? So I'm pretty sure Dead Cells has sold really well, right? Why can't Metroid, the source for what that kind of game is, sell on the same level? It's weird.
It is weird.
Yeah,
but Metroid Prime is on another level. Yeah, go on.
I wonder if it's the way they're marketing it, because I feel like there's a very easy way to make Metroid look like a very cool game, and a very easy way to make Metroid look like a super slow game where all you do is walk through hallways. So I think, I haven't seen the trailers for it, but I think there's a very good chance that they could just be marketing it to look like the slowest game you've ever played in your life that has shooting every once in a while. Because I feel like there's a very easy way to market that absolutely terribly. And I feel like there's a lot of people who may think that Metroid is a very, very slow game, whereas it has slow moments, but there's a lot of fast-paced action going on.
I just think people have terrible taste.
that might be true.
Like you said, people think it's a slow game. I actually do think, at least the first one, I played it a couple of years ago. It was really slow, lots of backtracking, and you literally walk at 1 mile per hour, and it's just
the other thing is that Metroid Prime came out in 2001, so even if for the time it was a good timing, you have to take into consideration that our expectations for what's good now are very different. They are similar, especially with Breath of the Wild, that I'm just okay, when are we actually going to start playing the game? Even Red Dead Redemption, it takes a long time to really get into the game. It's for everything to really open up. And I hope with Metroid Prime, they just kind of throw you in there. And actually, the original Metroid Prime, I think, was pretty good with that. The Space Frigate, I thought, was a perfect way to introduce someone into the game. And I think they need to figure out ways to keep people playing beyond just the first couple hours of the game.
Going back to the multiplayer aspect, there was a Wolfenstein 2 came out and it didn't have any multiplayer, and I feel like that was kind of a turnoff for a lot of people.
It was.
And that game really didn't sell as well as it probably should have. And Doom is another one where it has multiplayer, but it's not the best, and a lot of people are kind of wishing it was a lot better. So I feel like those are kind of examples of shooters that have adventure elements, kind of like Metroid, but they still those could have definitely been helped by a online multiplayer aspect.
But here's a problem with that. So they focus on the single player experiences for both of those games, and both of the single player campaigns for those games are a lot shorter, a lot more shallow than your typical Metroid Prime game. And they still it wasn't good enough. Even Doom had a multiplayer, but they tried to put in a multiplayer and it wasn't good enough for people. So what if they had just focused on one? That one would have been a lot better. You have to sort of, like, there's only so many resources that a team has.
Right.
It may not be possible to create a really good Metroid Prime game that has like a 60, 80 hour campaign and then also have a really good multiplayer. It might not be possible.
Yeah.
Retro Studios... Sorry, I was just going to say that Retro Studios tried it with Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. The multiplayer, while I thought it was fun as a kid, ultimately was considered to be kind of a bad mode for Metroid Prime 2. So, and they didn't continue with Metroid Prime 3. They scrapped it. They just focused on the single player for Metroid Prime 3.
Part of me feels like it'll kind of be like Doom, where the single player is pretty good, but the multiplayer is just meh. I don't know if you guys have played the multiplayer, but it's basically just Call of Duty with like demons. Like all the game modes are the same mode you can find in Call of Duty, but then you can turn into a demon sometimes.
So I'm in two camps. These are the two possibilities of the way I think it can roll out. One, they don't have multiplayer and they just focus on having an amazing single player game, and they find a way to hit the same kind of market that Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild hit. The other possibility is that they still have an amazing single player that's comparable to Mario and Zelda, right, or previous Metroid Prime games, and on top of that, also have a really good multiplayer that keeps people coming back and helps to sell the game. But that requires double the manpower, or at least 1.5 the manpower you normally would. And from a business perspective, is that really the right way to go? Maybe if they're gonna be using it to expand, so they can expand upon it with like DLC, and if they do treat it like another Overwatch but for Nintendo, where they're adding characters every couple months and people are going to continually buy more DLC content for this game, maybe then they will actually invest in that. That's possible, but that's going to require a really, really big team and a lot of money.
Maybe, just maybe, that whole Bandai Namco thingamajig that was like a huge deal a few months ago of them like possibly developing the game. Maybe they're working on the multiplayer. Maybe it's not just one team doing everything.
If Nintendo is willing to have two different development teams to basically make two different games and put it in one really good multiplayer game, one really good single player game, I'm all for it. I mean, this is more game for me, right? I just maybe that's what maybe they feel that's what it takes, and they are just willing to do that because they know they can make the money back with DLC.
If the game did have like a more traditional PvP online mode, like what do you guys think they should have in it to make it more appealing? Like, what do you think they could make it a hero shooter like Overwatch, and like each hunter would have like different abilities and whatnot? Or do you think they should keep it more like safe, like regular kind of like team deathmatch crap? Or what do you think?
Honestly, I would prefer it to be like Halo. So it's my favorite shooter type for online multiplayer, and it doesn't even have to be like super complex. Like you go into Halo and it's not like the most complicated online in the world. There's a few basic game modes. You can change different guns and ships on the map, and that's pretty much it. Team deathmatch is mostly what people play. It's not super complicated, so I feel like they don't have to have like a million different maps and modes and crazy stuff to make it really good.
To be honest with you, I don't think they'll just do a straight up cliche team deathmatch kind of thing. I think it's either going to be kind of more along the lines of Overwatch, right? Because that's just going to be, it's not even that they're copying Overwatch. They'll be following Hunters, right? That's what Hunters did. I think expanding upon that idea, maybe taking cues from Overwatch, they can make a really compelling multiplayer Metroid game. But at the same time, there's something else they could do. Look at Metroid Prime Federation Force. That's a co-op game. I think there's so much potential there if they were to do something like that on the Switch as well. Like, they could have a co-op experience. So there's just so many different avenues they could take. They can make it a hero shooter. They can make it a typical sort of team deathmatch kind of thing. They could just make Metroid be sci-fi Dark Souls, or they could make it, a co-op kind of multiplayer game. They have so many options. Yeah. And I think any of them could be really cool. Like, imagine being a Galactic Federation Force team on the Switch in HD with a 4K dock, by the way, and so you're playing the game at a higher resolution. It looks really great on the Switch, and you're playing on a team, and your goal is you're hunting in this open world Metroid game, right? So it actually would be complementary to the single player. You're not doing something different in like individual maps. It's in the same world, but you're not playing as Samus. You're playing as a part of the Galactic Federation, and you're in a team, and your goal is to hunt a particular monster. Let's say it's kind of like a Ridley spawn or something like that, and you guys have to find it in this world and hunt it down together, and that could be really, really cool. That's something I would love, and it wouldn't be your typical multiplayer. It'd be something different. Like, personally, I wish they could do it all. I wish they could have like your typical Metroid Prime experience, add in like those hunter Metroids that you could send out and do like the kind of pseudo PvP kind of thing, have the all the hunters, and have kind of like an Overwatch hero shooter multiplayer, and then also have cooperative play where you hunt down crazy monsters in this open world Metroid Prime game from the single player experience all in one. But that's like 5 different games.
Yeah, I think that last idea you had of using the same map and be able to hunt down like special creatures and stuff was probably the easiest way to go while being the most creative.
It sounds like Monster Hunter, like playing Monster Hunter online. Like it sounds like that.
So I mean, actually, that makes sense if you think about it. Like, one way they could pull it off is if they do that, if they come up with smart ways to create interesting like game modes, but it's intelligent by design, where you don't have to create a whole other section of the game to do it. If they use the same world, that would work. And heck, if they do want to have some team deathmatch, maybe they just take areas from the game that's already there and just and just kind of close it out so it's only within a certain area. That wouldn't require as much development time to make.
Right. If I had my way with this, and I had like $8 billion to lend towards the budget of this game, what I would do is have everyone make a really good single player, have a mode that's like an arena shooter, hero shooter deal thingy, and make like a cooperative Monster Hunter thing, like what you were saying, Andres. It kind of reminds me of Call of Duty, how they mainly had the campaign, and then they had the multiplayer, and then they had zombies, which was like the co-op deal. It kind of sounds like that, which I think would be really fucking cool. Call of Duty is probably like the biggest money maker outside of Fortnite now, like in video games, and even they can't even make a campaign, multiplayer, and zombies. Like, all 3 of those coexist like super well. Like, the campaign's always trash, zombies sometimes sucks, and the multiplayer, and the newest one is just the same multiplayer that it's literally always been. Besides,
they scrapped the single player. It's just zombies, Fortnite mode, and multiplayer. Fortnite mode is just another form of multiplayer. So and I think it was a good decision for them, because no one gave a crap about the single player in Call of Duty, right?
I think if they step back and put all their resources into one Call of Duty game instead of making freaking like one a year, and I know there's separate teams that cycle around, but the teams have to be smaller since there's a bunch of them. So I feel like Metroid doesn't come out like super often. They take a long time in between games.
True.
So they can put a lot more resources into one game of Call of Duty, which honestly they know it's gonna sell, so they're not really trying that hard.
That's also true.
And it comes out literally every year, so if one fails, they're like, who cares? There's another one coming out next year, and it's gonna sell like 20 million units, so like, who gives a crap? So I feel like there's a lot more ambition behind this and time that's gonna be put into this.
Very true.
There's just so much they could do.
I know.
I want to just be like, okay, this is what they're gonna do, but I don't know. But maybe we can kind of come to like, maybe we shouldn't come to a conclusion. But I kind of like the idea. What if they do have like a Federation Force aspect? So you do play it as a Federation Force member, and that's what you play as. But by making everyone the same, by being just Federation Force members, you can have a very standard multiplayer aspect to it, right? But maybe they don't go ham, or maybe they don't go all in on just that. They'll just have a couple different maps that are taken from the single player big open world experience, but also they have a co-op element where you play as a Federation Force member, as a team, hunting things within the world, which are different takes on the experience of the single player, but they're using the same world basically. And then on top of that, maybe they do also incorporate that Hunter Metroid PvP aspect that we talked about as well into your traditional single player Metroid Prime game. Like, all of that is happening within the big alien world that they're working on, and they don't have to go ahead and create a whole other game to do it. It's just kind of adding interesting multiplayer stuff to the world that they've already made. I think that might be possible. They could do that. Like, I don't think they can come up with like a giant Fortnite map, but for Metroid. Like, I don't see that happening.
Right. Yeah. I think they should do online multiplayer. I think there's a lot of creative ways that we've gone over that wouldn't be super hard to implement, to be honest. Like, a lot of it uses the same assets and same map, and you just put, like, especially your idea of hunting down different creatures, all you have to do is make creatures to hunt down, and
it could be like a weekly
area.
thing. Like, it's a different mission every week.
Dude, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, like a live game, kind of like Destiny and whatnot. They have like these events where, like, this week you hunt down Ridley and get this wicked sick thing, and then next week it'd be like Mother Brain or whatever, and
you get like different like cool armor and stuff for your Federation.
Yeah, and they could
members.
just have like, and they could be like time trials, so it's kind of like a high score sort of thing, so you can replay it throughout the week, and there you go. There's leaderboards for that. So maybe it's just
so easy.
And maybe it's just one co-op mission a week, but it's very replayable because you're playing for a record every week. They change it every week, and then they have like the little multiplayer mode on top of that, and that's it. Also alongside the single player, which can still feel like you're full on big giant, HD modern day open worldish Metroid Prime game. I think that is possible. So we came up with it. This is the idea. Nintendo, take notes.
So I definitely think there should be multiplayer. I think there's a lot of ways that they can make. They don't have to spend a ridiculous amount of time on it. There are creative ways to make something really cool while also having time to make this just amazing single player experience as well. And that just gets a lot more people into the game, and just why not have more cool, awesome stuff to do?
Before I ask my final question, I just want to say one sci-fi shooter game we haven't even brought up yet is Destiny, and what we were saying a couple of minutes ago kind of reminded me of that, where we have like the weekly stuff, and like there's kind of like this shared world. I mean, maybe they could do something that's kind of like Destiny. I mean, like, everyone else is kind of ripping off Destiny. So, I mean, Metroid is a space sci-fi shooter, just like Destiny. So maybe they could take some cues from that.
Breath of the Wild kind of took something from a whole bunch of other games. Like, they took something from Assassin's Creed. They took something from Dark Souls. They took something from all these different, like, big, like, third-person action-adventure games that have come out over the years. They took a lot of things from Skyrim. Like, what if the Metroid team also takes a lot of things from different shooters and sci-fi adventure games that have come out over the last few years? But they take cues from BioShock, they take cues from Destiny, from Halo, from Call of Duty, and they basically create this ultimate culmination of everything. So maybe we get some hero shooter elements in there, maybe we get some Destiny elements in there, maybe we get like this open world co-op game in there on top of like a very BioShocky kind of game as well, and it's just the ultimate thing, but still at its core Metroid Prime. Like,
right,
I think it's theoretically possible, right? I guess I believe we will for sure find out this year.
You did say in your Metroid Prime video, which everyone should watch, by the way, about your online multiplayer, that between announcement and release, and what is this, like the longest it's been for a Nintendo game or something?
So Metroid Prime 4 was revealed at E3 2017. Okay.
Yep.
My prediction was that Metroid Prime 4 would come out around holiday time. I said December, but it could come out somewhere between October and December, in that window, I think. And that would basically mean 2.5 years after it was announced. If you look at the history of Nintendo games from when they are officially announced to when they come out, 2.5 years is pretty much like about as long as it goes. There are just a couple exceptions. One of them, I guess, would be Pikmin 4. It was never mentioned in any sort of official capacity at an event, right? And then the other exception would be Breath of the Wild, which is a little bit more than 2.5 years. It's 2 years and 9 months. So, and that game was delayed to Kingdom Come. They spent like 3 years just on the physics engine for that game. So I feel like holiday 2019 is really likely when you take all the history and the information into account, unless there's some sort of delay. If it's delayed, anything can get delayed, right? But assuming there are no major hiccups, holiday 2019 just that's what it is.
I have one more question to ask you guys before we wrap things up. So Fire Emblem, no one played Fire Emblem before Awakening. Like, no one even heard of it. Like, no one cared about it until Awakening came out, which changed everything. Fire Emblem is now like a huge deal, at least as far as Nintendo goes. Like, they're really throwing their money into that game. Like, they've come out with so many games since Awakening, it's kind of ridiculous. But Awakening, if that game didn't sell well, the developers even said themselves, if that didn't sell well, they were done. Like, there's not going to be any more Fire Emblem games. But luckily, they did what I think was the right move and made it more alluring to mainstream audiences with like the dating sim crap, and like it was just way more simpler.
I figured it out. Anime waifus for Metroid. That's how we do it. That's how we go mainstream.
You're just killing anime waifus. Like Samus is like, no, I'm the only real female.
Yeah.
Just kill everyone. There you go.
So my question is, since a lot of the hardcore Fire Emblem fans didn't really like what Nintendo did to the series, do you think if Nintendo transformed Metroid into a more mainstream game, do you think it'll go over well with the really hardcore Metroid fans?
It depends on what you mean by mainstream. Like Breath of the Wild, that considered to be mainstream, but I think they made Zelda mainstream in the right way.
Right.
I don't have a problem with Fire Emblem Awakening. I'm for the waifus. Just saying. So it kind of depends on how they do it. Like, there's a way to be quote unquote mainstream and still be Metroid Prime, but there's a way to not. What if they just make a 10-hour Metroid Prime campaign? It just feels like Wolfenstein 2, right? It's basically just a first-person shooter and not really a Metroid Prime game. And then they just make the multiplayer a hero shooter aspect, and that's. And they're like, oh, here's your Metroid Prime 4. That would be a good game. It wouldn't be Metroid Prime, and Metroid Prime fans would be really pissed, but it probably would sell well.
Right.
Yeah, that would be bad. I think there's definitely a lot of ways that they could make it more mainstream. I don't even think mainstream's really kind of the right word. I think more modern might be the better word for that.
Right.
Make it more modern, make it faster, make it maybe flashier than it is. Maybe scarier is the right way to go.
Yeah, I think
might go for that scary demographic, because right now the demographic's kind of like, it's like space shooter. It's like, okay, that's very, very vague. I feel like maybe they should hone in on something there, and add some more elements that kind of just give it a more modern vibe, faster, flashier, scarier, kind of something like that.
I was just gonna say that I would love it if they were just to go all in on the horror element, but I feel like if that wouldn't do well for sales. Like if it was like, I think there will be, and there definitely should be horror elements, but I'm just kind of saying, like, if they were just to make it basically Alien Resident Evil, that wouldn't be good for Metroid either.
If it means not getting a Metroid game ever again if this doesn't sell well, but it's still like what people want, if it's between that and something that people didn't want but it sells really well, and that does mean we get more Metroid games, then I obviously would want more Metroid games. And I like multiplayer games. Like, if it was a very multiplayer centric game, I personally probably would like that a lot, but I know a lot of people wouldn't. But if that meant like it justified more sales, and maybe after that it sells good, then we'd get a more traditional Metroid game, and the people who bought the other one who never played Metroid before would get that and like get like the true Metroid experience or something. I don't know.
Right.
Okay. I was just thinking that like what if they were to have two different kind of 3D Metroid games, where one is the Hunters, Metroid Prime Hunters, which is more about the multiplayer hero shooting sort of thing, and then there's the other one that's more focused on the single player. Like, what if they were just to make those two different separate franchises?
Right.
That's one way you could kind of get both things, maybe. My only problem with that is that, or at least my fear is that if they were to do that, the Hunters games would just sell like hotcakes, and then the Metroid Prime, that like the single player ones will just be like. Although I said it, I have the faith that they're going to find ways to reinvent Metroid to make it be quote unquote mainstream. But when I say mainstream, I mean more like Breath of the Wild, where it's still a very hardcore game. Zelda, I mean, Breath of the Wild is arguably the hardest Zelda since like Zelda 2 from what was it? It would come out in the 80s, right? So yeah, it did come out in the 80s. Like Breath of the Wild is hardcore, but it's also mainstream at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm kind of hoping for Metroid Prime 4. Whatever that entails, being it faster paced, more horror elements, more shooting elements, but still maintaining that atmosphere and that explorative nature of the game, I think that's all possible.
So, I'm going to wrap it up here. Do you guys have any final thoughts?
Add multiplayer. Do it. There's a lot of creative ways to make it to where you can keep the single player. It's not too much work, but it adds a lot of really cool creative online components that would be very, very compelling to some of the more mainstream audience, while keeping your single player just as good as it ever was.
I agree. I think it's possible to have both, but not your traditional multiplayer, but some of the creative ideas we came up with throughout this discussion. I think some of those ideas could be what they could do to get both going. Yeah, so I'm right there with you, Brandon.
Right, yeah. I completely agree.
Yay!
Yay! I wonder what everyone else thinks, if everyone else would want a multiplayer mode in Metroid Prime 4. Let us know in the comments. Be sure to check out AndresRestart and What About Nintendo all the way over there to my left. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye, guys.